He's the founder and the director of the program on behavioral economics. He's the co-director of the initiative on AI and work, has authored many very well-known and highly influential books, and very recently Look Again, which I'm sure will be also very influential. Kat has also been the West Office of Information Affairs under the Obama administration, and is now senior counsel of Homeland Security. Also told me to share that he is an avid squash player, and his team beat the Cambridge and then in a rematch they will. And I shall now hand over to you. We will have opportunities for questions after the talk. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome, that's the technical term, to be here, to see Oxford and to see the work being done here. I get the second via the internet, and the first I just get today. And this institute is a beacon for all of us. We're thinking about these problems, and I'm so grateful to John and to every participant for doing the work you're doing. I learned a lot on the train about work being done here in a few domains, and really thank you for that. This is a somewhat unusual project. How many of you have seen Barbie, the movie? Okay, that's very good. This is about the Barbie problem. There's Barbie, not toy Barbie.
Oh, this is too good. Oh, she did to misguess.
There's Barbie, movie Barbie, normal Barbie. Every day is going to be great Barbie. Barbie has a great day every day Barbie. Ken has a great day only if Barbie notices him Barbie. But my topic is goods that people buy but wish did not exist. And apologies to Mattel and to the relevant actors. The defining example of a good that people buy but wish did not exist is a Barbie. Hence the shorthand for goods that people buy but wish did not exist, which is a Barbie. That's how we're going to understand the term in brief, Barbies. This bears on constitutional rights, freedom of speech and religion, privacy rights, emphatically social media use, uses of AI. AI might be a Barbie, climate change, consumption generally, and how we think about freedom. If it's not clear already, I hope it will be in short order that the author has a tiger by the tail. It's a wild and very strong creature that's running away with the author. There are Barbies everywhere. Is AI a Barbie? Kind of, as we'll see. Okay, here's a very simple illustration of the problem. My hope is this will resonate with experience. Imagine that there's a party here next Saturday night. Imagine too that many of your friends are going to be there. Imagine that you have two options: attend the party or skip the party. This isn't a complicated exercise of imagination. Contingent on there being a party, you might choose to attend the party. At the same time, you might prefer another option. The party does not take place. So the party is, in this account, a possible Barbie, meaning a good which you will consume, but which you wish did not exist. You might think on reflection that it would have been better if the party hadn't been arranged in the first place, or you might hope that the party would be canceled. So your preference ordering is 3, no party, 1, go to the party and to not go to the party, given that there is a party. Okay, we need to get clarity on why that might be your preference ordering. It's a peculiar list. One reason might be if you don't attend the party, you'll give a signal that you would prefer not to give. The signal might be that you do not like parties, that you do not like your friends, or that you don't like the host. The cost of giving any of those signals might be high. The reason you would prefer no party in this account is that if there were no party, there would be no risk of giving the unwanted signal. Alternatively, you might think that if the party happens, there will be opportunities for relationship building. You might not care that much about those opportunities. If you did, you wouldn't want the party to be canceled. Still, you might think that if other people take advantage of the opportunities, and if you don't, you will be at a comparative advantage. So there's a network here that you want not to lose out on, but if the party didn't exist, you wouldn't be at a comparative disadvantage. Okay, here are 4 plausible candidates for the same kind of thing: drinking, talking, political activities, and charitable giving. Now, the last 2 are complicated, and we'll get to why they're complicated, but there might be a political action, let's say in London, next week, that you feel you have to go to given the fact that it's happening, either because of the network or because of the signal. But if the political activity didn't occur, you might be thrilled about that. It might be that charitable giving for some people has the same characteristic, where people give contingent on there being a charity, but given their limited funds, if the charity weren't asking, they'd be pleased. There's data suggesting that people often will continue a conversation longer than they would like. They're enjoying it, but they want to tend a little quicker. And that they continue because of the signal of terminating the conversation. And as a not big drinker, I'm alert to the fact that drinking is a Barbie, in the sense that not drinking is sometimes a signal that you were recently an alcoholic, so you can't, or that you have moral disapproval of drinking, so you won't. And for those who weren't alcoholics and don't have moral disapproval of drinking, but don't drink, not drinking is potentially giving a signal that you don't want to give, and it might be inaccurate. Okay, buying things, consenting to things, and silencing oneself might have the same kind of structure. You can imagine, maybe you know people who feel that they should get married, given the institution of marriage, but they would prefer that there be no such institution so that they don't give relevant signals to their partner or to their families. Okay, so here's the Barbie problem. They involve some good that people consume or some activity in which people engage, even though they wish that good or activity did not exist. And the existence of large language models today is for many people looking like a Barbie. Is that consistent with casual empiricism, where many people are frantically purchasing large language models, are engaging with them, though they wish that they did not exist? Okay, let's say with some awareness of the provocativeness of the example, that funerals might be Barbies, at least in many cases, where people are having funerals, that if you're invited, you would better go. The signal is horrible if you don't. But if the bereaved thought, we're going to have a really small ceremony, that might be, for the people who go to the funeral, contingent on there being a funeral, a very good thing. Yes, does that resonate? Weddings are cheerful, but for many wedding goers, they might be Barbies too. where people, of course, want to go if they know and love the couple and if it's a great event for them, but they might think, I don't want to go to that wedding, but I'm certainly not going to say to the people who've invited me, I ain't going. That would be intolerable. Okay, the funeral and wedding examples are complicated if they are argued to be Barbies. And here's why. There are social norms that solve collective action problems. And in cases in which that's true, we're not dealing with Barbies as I'm understanding them. I realize that this is shorthand. Let's suppose that funerals, as an evolved institution, do a ton of good for the bereaved and maybe give meaning as well as distress to many of the goers. It might be that the norm that if you're invited to a funeral, you go, solves a collective action problem that we all face. That is, when we lose our loved ones, we want people who aren't that excited about going to go, and they go thinking this is a norm that you just follow. And the existence of the norm, as Edna Margalit explains in a terrific book on norms, this is a norm from which we all benefit. The same is arguably true of weddings. If you're invited, you go. The question whether it's worth it, all things considered, to go is what Bernard Williams urged in a paper on utilitarianism, is one thought too many. You don't do that in utilitarian calculus, you just go. And whether Williams was right about morality, I tend to think not. He was on to something about one thought too many, whereas if you do utilitarian calculus for following a norm, it might be that the solution to the collective action problem starts to unravel. And that's not a Barbie as I understand it. If this is a little elusive, I think the examples will become clear, and we're going to get very specific now. I did a study of use of social media. And you might think of this as working for AI of multiple kinds. I bet you elicit the same kind of results. And here's the result. I asked a nationally representative sample of people who have the same barbaric accent I do. I asked a nationally representative sample of people like this. How much would you pay to use Facebook, to use Twitter, to use YouTube, to use Reddit, to use several others, contingent on their existing? How much would you be willing to pay? And the number was, for a significant percentage, 0. I would pay nothing. The median was $5 to $10. Translate them into pounds, about the same, 5 to 10 pounds per month. I asked another group, not the same group, another group, also nationally representative, how much would you demand to stop using social media? They said 100 pounds, a lot. Now, there are two things to notice about this. First is the difference between willingness to pay and willingness to accept is supposed to be 0. Both are measures of welfare effects. Why you should demand more to give up use of something you like than you would pay to get use of something you like is baffling and inconsistent with the theorem for which Ronald Coase won the Nobel Prize. First thing to note is this is an anomaly. It's not an unheard of anomaly. The disparity between willingness to pay and willingness to accept is now well established for an assortment of goods. But what you've just heard is the largest disparity in the recorded literature, and there's a lot of literature. So the cliche is willingness to pay is typically 1/2, willingness to accept. In my case, it's 1/20. Willingness to pay is 1/20 willingness to accept. It's a massive endowment effect. I think the technical term is, it's a wild endowment effect. How do we explain it? Here are 3 accounts. And I confess I don't know which one is correct. Account number one is when people are asked how much they're willing to pay to use social media, they're really mad. And what we're picking up is not a measure of the welfare effect, but an outrage. Asked to pay something for a good that people have formerly enjoyed for free, they will say nothing or little because they think there's some sort of moral violation in the question. If that seems like an adventurous idea, the least appreciated work in behavioral economics, I say, is a book from a while ago by Truman Bewley called Why Wages Don't Fall During a Recession, which was the author's attempt to come to terms with a phenomenon that he tried to explain by reference to economic models. He's a very good developer of models, didn't like his own models. So we thought, I don't like what I've come up with. I'm just going to ask people, why don't you cut wages during a recession, employers? And he did a series of interviews. And the answer was, if you cut wages during a recession, workers are really mad and they start to shirk. They're outraged, they're indignant. And here the idea was something in the same family is being picked up here. A second possibility, which fits, I'll say, with the account of my 11-year-old daughter when confronted with this data. Is this a terrible thing for a father to do to an 11-year-old who uses social media to ask her what's going on in my data? She said, Daddy, I use social media a lot, but it's not good for me. And so the first answer she gave is, I don't have any money, so I'm not willing to pay anything because I don't have any money. But then I asked her, what if you had money? And she said, I wouldn't pay much. And the reason is it's not good for me. It's just wasting time. So the second hypothesis is that people are alert to the ambivalent character of the experience on social media, and they aren't willing to pay much for something that they don't value. So this is a category, underexplored category, wasting time goods. The third possibility is that social media is for people Barbies. I haven't tested that, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. So take study one to be a super endowment. Study two asks people first, how much would you demand to be off Facebook for a month? It's by someone other than yours truly. And the result was very similar to my study. It was basically in the vicinity of 100 pounds. 100 pounds to be off Facebook for a month. But the experiment was not meant to test for an endowment effect. It was an attempt to measure the welfare effects of use of social media. And here's how they did it. They said to a large population of people who said, pay me $100, I'm off. They said to them, you've got a deal. Here's the $100, stay off. And there was a way to ensure they actually did stay off. To a large number of other people who said they'd go off for $100 or 100 pounds, they said, no deal. You're going to have to stay on, but please let us monitor your experience in the next month. And they said, okay. So you got the setup, it was randomized, large numbers off for a month and the large numbers on for a month. First result is that the people who stayed off were A, more satisfied with their lives in that month than the people who were on, B, happier as measured by day-to-day questions, how happy are you? C, less anxious, and D, less depressed. So along every dimension of well-being, the people who stayed off had a better month than the people who stayed off. Here's the puzzle. Asked after the month, how much would you have to be paid to be off another month? That population said on average 87 pounds. See why that's a puzzle? They should have been saying, we'll pay you. We had a good month, keep us off. They learned a little bit that it was a good month, hence 13% reduction in what was demanded, but they still wanted to stay on. Why? Okay, fair question. Here's the third study, a test for Barbies. Notice, if you would, that my study and the second study I described asked people in their individual capacities, do you want to be on or do you want to be off? Without asking, what if Facebook or YouTube was unavailable? Then what would you want? To be more precise, here's our empirical test for Barbies. People were asked, how much would you have to be paid to be off Instagram for a month or off TikTok for a month? And it's in line with the previous studies, roughly 100 pounds. Then people were asked, okay, how much would you have to be paid to be off Instagram or TikTok, contingent on everyone else being off Instagram and TikTok? Get the setup? This is a precise test for the existence of a Barbie. On average, people are demanding $59 in the same vicinity as my paper to deactivate TikTok, a little less to deactivate Instagram for the same period, which seems to suggest that two platforms make people better off. But when asked how much they'd be willing to accept to have all the world, including themselves, deactivate from TikTok for a month, they said, we'll pay you. That if you can get rid of TikTok, we'll pay you $28 on average. And for Instagram, there was also a flip from $47, me off, everyone else on, to saying, I'll pay $10 a month if everyone goes off. Almost 2/3 of active TikTok users appear to lose welfare from the existence of the platform. And the same is true for almost 1/2 of active Instagram users. So people would demand significant money to stop using a product that they wish did not exist. That's noteworthy, yes? And the suggestion is that's omnipresent. How many times would you like to see a new launch of an iPhone? The data suggests that people want fewer product launches of iPhones, but contingents on the product launch of an iPhone, they're going to buy the new iPhone. Product launches of new technologies have the same structure as Instagram and TikTok for users. Note, if you would, that this is the mirror image of a plausible hypothesis from Amartya Sen in the Japanese Economic Review in 1995 about willingness to pay to protect the environment. Sen was troubled by the possibility that if you ask people how much they're willing to pay to save an endangered species or a perceived area, the number is going to be really trivially small. And if you aggregate across a large population, it's still going to be small. And that data is used by private and public organizations all over the world. Sen's concern was people might be willing to pay little to protect the environment unless they're assured that other people will pay as well. They might think my own payment will do essentially nothing, but if everyone's paying that admittedly small amount, we can achieve a great deal. I'd pay a lot more than a tiny amount, supposing that everyone else is doing so. We need a word for it. It's not, the word Barbie gets us exactly in the wrong direction. What's the right word for a reverse Barbie? Is it a Taylor Swift? I'm a big fan of Taylor Swift. Maybe we would call these Taylor Swifts. Okay, what can be done? Party givers can maneuver people into a situation in which they're buying a good, so to speak, that they wish did not exist. Companies can do that too, and are doing that, maybe with implicit awareness of the mechanisms involving signaling and network effects behind non-purchase, and often highlighting those things. Ties and high heels, I have more clarity with respect to ties than I do high heels. I asked one of my hosts on the train today, is it terrible I'm not wearing a tie? A tie is for many men a Barbie, and maybe a high heels are for many women a Barbie. The sense of things you buy but wish did not exist. Okay, sometimes the structure of the problem is very specific. Some person P engages in some action, e.g. markets a product, that forces another person Q to make a choice that reveals information about Q that Q does not want to reveal, and that requires Q to decide whether to give a signal that Q would prefer not to give. That's sometimes the problem with AI. I think not typically, though more frequently than this structure suggests AI is a Barbie. Q's dilemma might not arise by accident. It's a product of P's mischievous or self-interested action. If P is an employer, it might ask P's employees to reveal, for example, their political leanings, including, for example, whether they would want to unionize. If P is a government, it might give citizens a choice whether to take a loyalty oath or to decline politely. The Barbie, the loyalty oath has the structure of a Barbie. Okay, norms, and now we're going to be a little clearer, I hope, about the difference between norms and Barbies. Norms might prevent people from defecting from some endeavor from which the group benefits. For example, moving office equipment, giving blood, giving to charity, contributing to national defense. People would like to defect were the norm not in place, but when a norm solves a collective action problem, it makes people better off, even if they would prefer to defect. On reflection, people should welcome the norm. That's not what we observe for TikTok and Instagram. These are not entities that people wish continued. A number of them wish they wouldn't exist. So it's not having this structure. There's a similarity between the problem of identifying and positional goods, goods that people consume but which did not exist. That's true if people consume such goods, for example, a car, a watch, a suit, to avoid giving an unwanted signal or to avoid a form of unpleasant self-signal. Should we tax positional goods? Maybe. And get a little more specific now. Addictions have a similar feature, but they're not what I'm talking about. So I detected in the room when we were talking about social media, correct me if I'm wrong, an implicit sense that people are addicted to social media in some way. That's completely fair, but that's not the problem I'm discussing. For Barbies, it's not, addiction is neither necessary nor sufficient for them to exist. It has a different problem. Okay. As longtime University of Chicago people, the first words on this slide are obligatory. They're consistent with my self-understanding. The best route for solving the problem lies in voluntary action. That's almost a song we sing at the University of Chicago. Yes, it doesn't have a lot of rhythm, but it's very, very familiar to yours truly. The problem is, as the Instagram, TikTok data shows, it's not going to work. Voluntary action isn't going to work. So we have to think about cases in which legal action might be considered. Recall the possibility that an agent has deliberately engineered a situation in which people must either consume a good they don't like, or engage in an activity they don't enjoy, or offer a signal they really don't want to offer, or disclose a fact they'd prefer to keep private. There we're observing a welfare loss, and legal intervention ought not to be out of the question. This should be more familiar than it might seem. Restrictions on loyalty oaths are plausibly a reflection of the structure of the problem that recipients of loyalty oaths face. Waivers of privacy rights might have a similar feature. If you waive a privacy right, you're signaling you have something to hide, which might mean that asking for a waiver is undesirable because waivers are a Barbie. unconstitutional conditions, as when it said to work for the government, you have to silence yourself. Even if people voluntarily do that, it might have the same structure as the TikTok problem. Okay, let's note, if we might, that nudges, taxes, subsidies, mandates, and bans constitute the universe of potential solutions to the Barbie problem. And let's note also that it's less exotic, this idea, than it might seem, because basically the day before yesterday, Instagram, with an implicit awareness of the nature of the problem, said to teenagers, we're going to roll out a nudge, that's how they describe it, which says, time for a break, it's getting late, consider closing Instagram for the night. If people have been spent more than 10 minutes watching reels or reading DMs after 10 p.m., then it comes off. And it's an ingenious response, isn't it, to a problem that has the structure that we've been describing, the Barbie problem. And Instagram, I think, ingeniously allows teens to turn the reminder off for the moment. They can't turn off the feature. So it's trying to say to teenagers, you collectively would be better off without this, but contingent on this existing, you're probably going to spend a lot of time at night on it. Okay, we might consider maybe subsidizing non-positional goods like health and taxing things that have a Barbie feature. Instagram and TikTok, I say this with fear and trembling, but the current data is strongly suggestive that that's an on-the-table alternative, given the structure of people's preferences, with many wishing it didn't exist. We might want to think hard about establishing norms in the workplace or via government, short of law, that addresses the problem. It's a little misanthropic to say there should be fewer parties and fewer dinners and fewer Barbies, but let's put the idea on the table. There's one thing, final word, that is not a Barbie, and that is my feeling right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a thought-provoking talk. We've now got around, I'm very mindful that you've got a book launch tonight in London, so we don't have that much time, but we'll do around 20 minutes of questions now. And yeah, I can already see your hand there, please.
Thanks very much for the talk. I was wondering how your work relates to what David Velleman wrote about imposing additional options on people. So his idea was that just by giving someone an additional option, you can harm them, even if they end up being perfect decision makers. So not giving them the option will not be a policy of paternalism, but non-maleficence. And it seems that this is the Barbie problem. I was wondering.
Okay, so I know his work and admire it and have a imprecise recollection of why giving people an option would be a bad thing. If his claim is that giving people an option is a bad thing because they choose it as a result of signals given by not choosing it, then this is very compatible. I'm wondering whether it's a broader idea, giving people options. So there's a lot of work on giving people options can confuse them and lead them to choose non-preferred option, that it might be imposing decisional burdens on them, it might flip them. They prefer A to B, you introduce some unwanted C, then they prefer B to A. The choice in the pairwise comparison is more reliable in welfare terms. So I mean something very specific, which is that the introduction of and it's not a claim about addiction. It's about the introduction of an option inclines people for one of two reasons to choose it, even though its non-existence would be something they'd prefer. Let's note also that we want to be careful about many of the things I've said, because these are about people's decisions, not about their welfare. So decisions are welfare predictions that might go wrong. It may be that the people who wish that Instagram didn't exist underestimate this would surprise me, but the benefits to them of Instagram, and it's an insufficiently reflective assessment of an Instagram-free world would be worse. So let's note that.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. I just wanted to press you on the analogy with addictions a bit more, because as I understood your paper sort of accompanying this talk, that I think it was dated a draft from January this year, then you can view the issue as distinguishing in three cases. And in one of the cases, then it's morally good that the choice to say do some activity exists. And those are the cases which you mentioned of say, on reflection, people should welcome that this choice exists, like giving blood, giving to charity. You mentioned as well, like contributing in some way to national defense. The second kind of case would be where it's morally bad that the choice exists. And I think I understood you as putting like addictions in this kind of category, because you seem quite open to say people should be informed or warned or nudged down to those sorts of things. We might even ban smoking, especially for people who were born after a certain year or something like that. And then there's this third case, and this is where I understood you to be putting Barbies, was where it's not really strictly morally good or morally bad that the choice to do X exists in and of itself. And so on reflection, there's no things considered moral reason either to welcome or eliminate that choice. And then I was a bit confused in your talk, because actually, you know, your emphasis on social media, then it seems that given the kind of welfare deficit that seems to be resulting from people's kind of inability to stop using social media, then that does suggest to me that it would fall into the category of things where it's morally bad that the choice exists. And therefore the kind of nudging policies appear. And so that's why I think it might be more analogous to the sort of addiction cases that you talk about in the paper.
That's great, thank you. So take the paper and yours truly as being a block-headed welfarist. So our moral account is welfarist all the way down. And let's talk about that a little bit, shall we? So Bernard Williams' objection to utilitarianism urges that if you're thinking about whether to save someone you love who's about to be hurt in a car accident, you have one thought too many. The block-headed welfarist might say to that, he's got kind of moral psychology right, but he doesn't have morality right. So if people don't do a utilitarian calculus before they save one another, then that's very much utility maximizing, because otherwise people are going to be making time-consuming and self-serving assessments, and the norm that his one thought too many language resonates with is one from which we all benefit. Okay, so that's let's put a welfarist stake in the ground and say that if addiction is something to which society should respond, and I believe it is, it's because it's profoundly reductive of the welfare of people who get addicted. So the reason we want to respond, let's say, to alcoholism or smoking is that people's lives are much worse. And that's the moral reason. An addiction isn't a Barbie problem in the sense that I strongly hope that no one is addicted to Barbies. Maybe some are, or to going to parties that are far away and tedious, that you would be addicted to that. So an addiction doesn't have the same structure as the TikTok data. It has the same top line claim, maybe, where people buy the goods but wish they didn't exist. But even for addiction, even that is complicated, because an addict might say, gosh, I don't want heroin not to exist. I need it. So if you're addicted, the idea of make it go away, that's not the thought. So addiction is a different thing. The reason we should tackle the problem of addiction is it makes people's lives go worse. And that's the same reason we should tackle the problem of goods that people choose, but prefer do not exist. So the Instagram users are saying in majority, we're better off without Instagram. And then asked, how much would you have to be paid to be off? They're saying a lot. And their lives are worse by virtue of the existence of the thing. If you take them off and leave the thing, you're not helping them. Please, yeah.
But then I'm wondering whether the Barbie problem itself is actually a problem. Because if something falls truly into that category of things where it really doesn't matter morally whether the thing exists, even from a welfarist perspective. So take the party example, that seems like a pure Barbie case. That doesn't seem like a kind of philosophical problem that you're a bit torn between, oh, I'd rather there wasn't a party because I'm feeling a bit lazy, but you know, I still want to go in order to show I care about these people. And that feels just more like a kind of human beings make hard choices in life.
Okay, the welfarist understands everything you've said because the welfarist lives in the world, but is puzzled by the words and wants to speak a different language. Is this clear? The reason the welfarist wants to, and I'm using the word blockheaded partly by way of self-disparagement, but let's say it loud, say it proud. The welfarist says the idea of a morally that isn't reducible to the well-being of persons is a mystification. So would you say that, well, I get Kant a little, I try, and respectful bow to deontologists, but morally in the sentence you used wasn't Kantian, I don't think. So what would be the moral problem with Instagram or alcohol that isn't welfarist?
Because I'm thinking Barbie problems per se don't seem to generate welfarist problems.
Absolutely do. If people are saying, save me, I don't want to live in a world in which there are Barbies. Because we're spending time and money on something that we're spending time and money on only so as not to give an unwanted signal to others. And the stakes could be high. Is this clear for AI, which has a Barbie characteristic? Let's profoundly hope in the end it's not. But there are people rushing with money and time right now for a good whose existence in the world they don't welcome.
So I think there are lots of questions. I know, Isabel, you are on my list.
Thank you so much. Just a quick contribution then about how to address this. I'm wondering if you would not be interested to look at corporate law, because corporate law, as its origin, had like the provision that the social good or whatever was the purpose of the corporation was actually validated by the state. So in reference with some kind of a public good in mind. And it seems that your Barbies example are actually very much tied to that. And then I would be interested to see like the actual list of Barbies which are not produced by for-profit corporations, probably not that much in proportion.
Good point and good question. The government might say, if you want to, whatever, you have to waive your rights. And you're free to waive your rights. But if you do, you're giving a signal that is extremely unwelcome. And it might be a form of self-signaling that you don't like either. So I say any institution, educational institutions, might be producing problems with the same structure. And I share your view that for-profit corporations probably have an implicit awareness of this and are marketing goods with reference to it.
Up here for last
Yes, I had a question. I was wondering that whether the main problem with the Barbie problem is that if you try to identify it or define it or even address it, you're just creating even more Barbies. and it just becomes an endless cycle of problems. And that makes it so difficult. So is the Barbie problem an invitation to create more Barbies in the world? And that's actually the issue. If I understood correctly, yeah.
I hope not. So this is very helpful. Thank you to clarify categories of cases. So there are goods which exist, which people demand money to stop using, which are not Barbies. Squash is not a Barbie. Agreed? Okay, tennis is not a Barbie. For some people, probably it is, but in general, not. Then there are social norms that get people to do things that they're grumpy about, but that on reflection, people think the norm is in our interest. You show up. And then there are things which are unwelcome products or activities which people are purchasing or engaging in large numbers. And it's not quite a positional good, though some of the dynamics overlap with positional goods. To identify them might be the path toward reducing them. My speculation is they're all around us, and that people in the room are seeing things that have this structure. That's my hunch, that I certainly haven't seen.
Katja? So thanks for the talk. Great. I'm thinking of paternity leave and research on paternity leave, and we could think of paternity leave as a reverse Barbie because it tends to not be taken unless you really force people to take. Think about Scandinavian, reforms, where specifically in Norway, for example, they've offered full salary to people who would take paternity leave, and that wasn't enough. There was still only 3% of fathers taking it until they've also said, you take it or the whole family loses it for 4 weeks, and then people just flip. Or you could think of going to work when you could be paid 100% of your salary while welcoming your new baby as a Barbie. And the reason, there is a lot of research on that. Why do people do it? And one that looks really convincing to me is that it's a fear of missing out. People are afraid, men are afraid if they don't show their face to work, they take the leave, they'll be disadvantaged against their co-workers. So have you thought about this research? Does it have implications to sort of what you're talking about, including social media? So people might be losing on the immediate well-being, but perhaps showing their face in some way, comes with other pays-off that people won't. That wouldn't be a risk if nobody was there, right? If the Instagram didn't exist.
That's terrific. One thing I didn't mention in the second study of the 3 social media studies is that there's one dimension along which the people who stayed on were better off than the people who got off. Just one. And that's they knew more about politics. Now, it's possible that the anxiety and depression felt by the people who stayed on associated with knowing a lot about politics. It's also possible that that 87 pound for another month you're going to have to pay me was people thinking, I am not a narrowly Benthamite kind of a person. I want to have a fuller, richer experience, even if I'm a little sadder. So it might be that people weren't really blockheaded utilitarians in their choices. That's very possible. I love the example of paternity leave. And I'm thinking that that's a case where if it has Barbie features, the kind of reverse, a mandate or an incentive makes sense because people are better. One possibility is that the husbands are better off taking paternity leave, but they won't do it unless they're not giving the unwanted signal. And another possibility is they're not better off, but the women and the children are. And so there's an externality reduction. That's very interesting. And I'm thinking that the category of reverse Barbie you're describing that's also probably omnipresent. And I'd love to think of other examples.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. So I want some clarification on one aspect, and that is the issue you said. I mean, the Barbie is something that we wish wouldn't have existed. Is it because it's harmful to us, or is it because it's harmful to the world? And I was intrigued by one of your slides, which talked about the possibility of not having TikTok for anyone, simply getting rid of the application. And here I thought the motives could be mixed. I mean, you might be concerned about not losing, the competitive advantage, but you might be some kind of altruist and say the world would be a better world if there wouldn't be TikTok. And I thought if we were to apply this approach to ChatGPT, okay, maybe I think ChatGPT is very bad for humankind, but I don't see exactly how it harms me in the same way that Instagram might hurt your daughter, so to speak, by using this. So can the model actually factor in these different possible motivations or definitions of what bad means in this context?
That's fantastic. And the data in the third paper, which is not my paper, what's public, leans toward people being self-interested in saying, I don't want TikTok to exist, but you're going to have to pay me to get off it, given its existence. It leans toward that, but I don't know that it rules out your point, and it's clear your point is right. And I'm puzzling over categories of cases where people would say, if I'm only talking about my own welfare, I want this to exist, but given the range of things I care about, including others, I prefer it not exist. And you could even see that for Barbies, literal Barbies, where people could say, I really have fun with them, but they're kind of sexist, and the world will be better off without them.
Had, I know over there, you've had a long time, your hand up, so please, we've got time for around 2 more questions.
Nice, thank you. Really, really interesting. I really enjoyed it. My question is about the tools part, the solutions to the Barbie problem, which also I think relates to the previous 2 questions. It seems that you're identifying the problem to be giving unwanted signals. But you also, of course, address the network effect, and I think the previous question was addressing the network effect and missing out on things. And I thinking of the reasons of this feeling is about the service that these platforms that you address provide. And I was thinking of the tools in this respect. And you suggest that text might be on the table while you were hesitant. And I was thinking the platforms that are offering these services, their market power, their financial power, whether text would actually have any effect at all on the end users, because they have the ability to carry the burden and maybe reflected on their other beneficiaries, like possibly the main beneficiaries, advertisers, rather than imposing it on the end users. So we might still end up having the same dilemma, if that makes sense. And I was wondering what you think of that.
That's good. As you were talking, so I'm going to back into this. The fear of missing out is ambiguous between 2 things. One is you want the thing to exist because you have some gain by being there. Case 1. Case 2, if the thing didn't exist, you'd be better off. Can I give you an example of the first if it seems elusive? In Washington, there's something called the Washington Correspondents' Dinner. And to get invited is really cool. And people fear missing out. They fear not being invited. And the people who get to go don't wish the Washington Correspondents' Dinner didn't exist. They're really glad it exists. It's not that they think the world would be better, except maybe for social reasons for them, because they don't want to miss out on the wonderful things, connections they make, fun they have, stories they have. There's that. The tax point is great. I think you're right. I have a lot of trepidation about asking for taxes on consumers who use goods First, you want to make sure you have the structure of the problem right. Second, you want to make sure you don't overshoot. But you're clearly right that the tax should be imposed on the users, not on Instagram. So maybe a mandatory fee would be in the social interest. That it seems pretty heavy artillery and odd. Maybe we can build from the nudge that is being used on Instagram for teenagers. That is a very precise response to the problem, especially if people know other people are getting the same nudge.
Linda, final question. Thank you very much for this wonderfully stimulating talk. I was wondering what you think the best description is of the values or interests at stake here. So it sounded like there might be something like autonomy compared to privacy. So if you had to make it really, really explicit what's at stake, what would that description sound like?
Human well-being. So the claim is that people are spending time or money on something from which they lose. That's grave. And the intuition is that's more pervasive than we are aware.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on.
Join me in thanking